Hey guys, welcome back to the challenge. Today is day 4 of the 30-day gardening challenge, and today we are talking about how to decide whether you need an in-ground garden or a container garden. Those two types of gardens, the in-ground garden or the container garden, serve different purposes at different times, and to be honest with you, I have both. I have containers everywhere in spots where I can't have an in-ground garden and vice versa. So I'm just going to give you today the information that you need to be able to make the right choice for yourself, so that if you have to make this decision, which I'm just here today to give you the information that you need to help you make the decision. So before you move forward, you need to decide which one you need for your space, and I'm going to give you some pointers. So the first area that we're going to look at are container gardens. And the container garden pros, I thought what I would do is like create this handy dandy little sheet and talk about the pros of container gardens. So the pros of a container garden are that you start with a clean slate. You are planting directly into the soil that you put in that garden. So usually if you're starting with topsoil, or you're starting with like a combination of topsoil and compost or any of those kinds of things, you are planting into a clean slate. You're deciding what's in there, so you don't have to worry about having poor soil. Like, you don't have to worry about having really hard pan clay soil that won't drain, or sandy soil that won't hold water or nutrients. You are starting with a blank slate, and it's going to be easier for you to be successful when you do that. Number 2, you are going to deal with fewer weeds. The amount of weeds that grow up into this new potting soil is going to be a lot less than growing in established soil that might already have weed seeds in it. Like, there's a weed seed bank. That's a very real thing. For those of us who grow our own food and you grow in ground, you know that there are weed seeds that have accumulated over time, and those are in the soil. So you don't deal with that when you're growing in containers and you're using soil that you have purchased, whether it's topsoil or potting soil. So number 3, it's easier for you to dial in that fertility. Now, we talked yesterday about soil fertility, and I told you yesterday in the third lesson all about the fertilizers that I recommend and that I started off with as a newbie gardener that gave me great success and that I would recommend for you. It's easier for you to dial in fertility when you are fertilizing soil that you have started with, right? Like, it has organic matter. There may be some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in there already, but by and large, that soil is pretty much just going to take on whatever fertility you give it. So you don't have to worry about what you're starting with. Do I have too much potassium to start with? Do I need to back off on that? Pretty much, if you're starting in a container garden, you can be sure that you're going to have great success with just the basics, and you can move forward. What are the cons of container gardening? Every type of garden has, there are pros and cons, and so container gardens are no different. The expense can be very high with a container garden. You have to buy all your soil to start with. You also are going to have to buy or otherwise procure your containers that you have. The watering schedule becomes very important because you're growing in a container that's raised up off the ground, and that water that you put into your garden or that otherwise gets into your garden by rain will leach out of that soil faster than it would in ground. So be very intentional about your watering schedule. You may also need to add some actual watering on timers like drip irrigation or sprinklers or things of that nature to help you keep your water going in those containers. And the final real con here is that you do risk losing everything if you happen to get contaminated soil. I don't know if you were following gardening a couple years back, but there was a huge push to grow our own food. Food was very expensive and people really wanted to grow their own. And there were a lot of people buying compost and buying it in mass, and a lot of the compost that was purchased either wasn't finished properly, or there was a lot of agricultural residue, chemical residue in it. Grazon comes to mind, and Grazon is a chemical that basically, I'm no scientist in this area, but basically it kills the leafy matter so that it can be processed. And then when the cows ate that and then digested it, their manure had this chemical still in it, and that chemical killed plants. So you could see lots of videos. If you wanted to Google it, it's pretty heartbreaking. A lot of people would get a huge load of soil, super excited about starting their garden, and they would fill their containers with this soil, and lo and behold, it would be contaminated with Grazon, and everything was lost. And so this was a couple years back in the gardening community. It was pretty widespread. And yeah, so we're happy this isn't happening now, that I haven't heard, but just be careful. That's one of the things that you risk when you are buying your soil. You risk that contamination. So we've talked about containers. That does it for our pros and cons for containers. Now let's look at the in-ground garden. So your in-ground garden pros are that you only have to grow it, you only have to build it once. Like once you kind of go in and till it, and create your beds, you technically don't have to do that again. You could rod fork and rake in between crops, and creating it one time might be all you ever have to do. So there's definitely an ease there. You have to have the ability to scratch up the soil surface, so you're going to need some sort of rototiller, or you can hire someone to do that pretty quickly. If you know where you want your garden, you've figured out your placement, and you want to scratch up a certain spot, you can probably find someone local to you to do that for you in a few hours. You'll be all set. So do it once, forget about it, you're good to go. Second pro is that roots have a more reliable access to water, and your soil doesn't dry out as quickly as it does in beds. Those raised beds will dry out faster, whereas your in-ground garden will not. And that's a huge plus, especially in the summertime. I know that we don't think about that right now because it's so cold, but it won't be long until it's really hot and dry. And in-ground gardens do typically hold that soil moisture better than containers. So your final pro is that it is going to be cheaper to start. You don't have to buy a ton of wood or metal for beds. You don't have to do all of the soil purchasing. If you do purchase some compost, it's not as expensive or not as much of a cash outlay as you would have if you were doing containers. So you definitely can save some money there with growing in ground. So here are the cons. There are definitely cons to growing in ground, and here they are. The first is you may be starting with poor soil. You may be starting with soil that is very heavy in clay, very low in organic matter. You might have drainage issues. The soil may not drain properly. And when that happens, you can have issues with root rot, plants just dying off if they're not draining properly. So you may have to add a lot of organic matter into your soil for the first few seasons to condition it and to get it to where you want it to be. Okay, that's one of the issues you run into if you have an in-ground garden, is you might not be starting with the best soil. And if you live in the Southeast and you have red clay soil, then you guaranteed are going to have to start putting a lot of organic matter into that soil. I know that from experience, and in that regard, containers are better. The second con, and it is a big one, or it can be, it definitely is for me, is that weeds may be a very big and constant battle for you. I live in the Southeast. We have Bermuda grass, and Bermuda grass is trying to control it could be considered a fool's errand, but I have to do it, so I do. I try my best. Weeds are definitely more in your soil bank, in the ground, as opposed to growing in containers. There's just no other way around it. So another con of your in-ground garden that I forgot to mention, which is a plus for the container garden, is that you can technically move a container garden around, whereas you cannot move around your in-ground garden very easily. So there you have it. What I want you to do is I want you to take these points that I've raised about both container gardens and in-ground gardens and understand that one is never better than the other. It just is better for you and your specific situation. So you have to decide for yourself based on what your goals are, what your budget is, which one will work for you. And then you just do it. And then you just go all in, and that's what you do. If you don't have a yard of any kind, and you only have a balcony that gets variable sunlight, a lot of folks have great success with something called a green stalk, which is a vertical planter. And those are gorgeous, so fun to grow in. Some of them are 5 feet tall, and you can put lots of plants. Like some of them will hold like 50 plants or more. Some of them are self-watering, and they go on your deck. And you can roll them around, and you can cover them really easily with insect cover, like insect netting. So it's really fun, cute way to grow like a super fun salad garden on your back deck. And I just love those as options. I think having something like that, whether it's a vertical garden, container garden, or in ground, gives everybody the ability to grow their own food. And I think I'm a big evangelist for that. Like if there's anything that anyone does after they listen to me talk for a while, if they grow their own garden, my job will be complete. So that's it for lesson 4. If you have any questions about this specific to your situation, drop them in the comments and I will answer your comments to the best of my ability. And I hope to see you tomorrow for day 5. Bye for now.